After the call of the first ever playoff game on campus, men. And, you know, Sean, you prepared for games in all these different sports through all these different years, and you have a sense of what might happen. But what told you that this game was going to go the Irish's way after that sequence there with a pick and a score? I mean, was it, in your mind, was that a knockout blow that early in the game?
Not necessarily, but I do think, Scott, to answer your question, and we talked about at the beginning of the broadcast, I think we felt coming into the game that Notre Dame was a team, one of the best rushing teams in the country. Indiana was a team that was #1 in the country in stopping the run. So whoever won that matchup was likely going to win the game. And we saw it early, the 98-yard touchdown run. Part of that, a lot of that was the highlight we just saw. It's the talent of Love. But it's also control of the line of scrimmage, and Notre Dame had that just about all night long. So a little disappointed I am. I thought Indiana would put on a better show. I don't know if they just had a bad night or if they just weren't that good. And when they played teams that had good defenses like Ohio State, like Michigan, and like Notre Dame here tonight, that showed up. Because they were a team that ran it up on just about everybody else.
Greg, you've lived in these big stages.
I still think they're a good team. Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I heard you were beginning to answer his point, but I just, as a guy that have been on these stages yourself, and you were typically on the other side, right? Big favorites with the Tide. But for IU to have the Irish pick them and then score and be in a position they've so rarely been in, where they're now trailing, and then it grows. How much more difficult does the hill become to climb when they're facing something they really haven't lived with all year?
Well, impossible, Scotty. And I think a lot of it, too, is when we talked to their coaching staff, they said, hey, we have to be able to protect Curtis Rourke. And frankly, they're a team that's kind of built to be able to play from behind. They have a great quarterback. They got great weapons. So being behind shouldn't be a death nail. But when you saw just how significant the advantage was with Notre Dame's pass rush and how ferocious it was, and the linebackers that they kept firing over and over and over again, they had no answers. So I think that this team was definitely hit with a haymaker out of the gate. They didn't often put themselves in mistake-prone situations. They only had 8 turnovers on the season. 4 of those 8 turnovers came against your Terps. So it's not like we've seen this team make a lot of mistakes, and they were clearly a little woozy early as a result of that mistake thrown by their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, after the sudden big play created, and then the pick immediately killed him.
So we can turn our focus ahead to New Orleans. It's Georgia and Notre Dame, and this Irish team brings with it a very stout defense and a run game it can trust against a Georgia team that I guess Fellows is trying to sort out its quarterback situation with Beck now injured. They know that. A first thought on what we might see in that game in New Orleans on New Year's Day.
Well, you know, we did the game, the opening game of the year for Georgia against Clemson, and they looked very much like the best team in the country after that. A lot of people thought Clemson wasn't very good. I think it made you appreciate what Georgia did that day even more when you realize Clemson is a good team. They're going to be in this college football playoff tomorrow. But, you know, Georgia, they keep winning, but it feels uncomfortable. You know, when you watch them do it. You know, a lot of people thought Carson Beck, myself included, was the Heisman front-runner starting the year. He wasn't even in the conversation by midseason. Now he might not even play. They keep finding a way to win, Greg, but to me it always feels like they're right on the tightrope. And we saw a Georgia Tech team that is good, not as good as Notre Dame, really should have beat Georgia at the end of the year. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Notre Dame beats them.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting, we've seen Georgia play against what I think is a team that has maybe the fewest question marks, and that's the Texas Longhorns. And they've just ran roughshod through a Texas team that has seemingly had all kinds of pros, top flight talent at the perimeter positions, and it didn't matter. So I think this Georgia team has a certain resilience that we haven't necessarily seen at times from Georgia because they've been so dominant. So I think they're calloused. I think they're poised to play their best football. But I also think this is a team whose identity is going to look very different moving forward without Carson Beck. They were a team that couldn't run the football consistently all year long. Now they have Gunnar Stockton likely in as the starting quarterback, who's really more of a runner than he is a thrower at this stage of his development. So I think the Georgia team that we saw all season might look very different against Notre Dame than what we saw throughout the course of really the first 13 and a half games, if you include the second half when Stockton played against the Texas Longhorns.
Appreciate the time, gentlemen. Realize you've been out there in the freezing cold for many, many hours. I wish you guys a Merry Christmas in between now and the next time we visit. Happy New Year as well, boys. Be well. Thank you for your time.